Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good evening, or good afternoon, and welcome back. I'm here with the Thunderous One, and we're discussing the situation in the UK, and we're going to look at some statistics and news reports. We hope to do this monthly now, so we'll have a regular catch up and just talk about the situation in the UK and Europe. Things are not well, but I believe that people are waking up to the situation. They're seeing the statistics, they're seeing the change, and hopefully we can do our part to inform people, because if you have the facts, you can make the right decisions. And I believe governments are often misinforming people because of whatever agenda they have. But with the facts, once you know the truth, you can remain informed. So Thunderous, welcome.
Hi, everybody, and hi to yourself as well, Lloyd. Good to be back.
Yeah, and Shoshana, thanks. She says we are sending a huge SOS. I mean, this whole Glastonbury carnival, this guy was calling what death to the IDF, which is insane. This is on live television. It's being broadcast by the BBC. What about, look at South Sudan, 500,000 people killed or something, far more than have died in Gaza, and yet no Jews, no news, and he doesn't call for death to the Muslims murdering Muslim kids in Sudan. Fascinating. Or Yemen, the Houthis, like 700,000 people dead, something like that. No death to the Houthis for murdering so many Muslims and Muslim kids. Interesting. Only Jews get targeted.
Well, it goes back to, I think you and I have discussed this many times over the years that you and I have conversed. It can go back to, say, the Muslims in China in the concentration camps, where I think that goes all the way back to about 2017, where you and I was discussing it on another channel. Then Yemen, Sudan, and other various locations where there seems to be a reticence when it's Muslim on Muslim violence, or when it's another country. But whenever Jews are involved or a Western country is involved, all of a sudden they feel the need to voice an opinion or a concern.
Yeah.
And Go on. I was just going to say, Glastonbury is quite an interesting one, because when you do the comparison with the lady that did the tweet, they got 3 years, 1 month in prison. Her tweet would have had a minimal exposure. What created it to explode was obviously the arrest and the charge. Now, had no one commented on the tweets, then it likely would have gone under the radar and not have been seen by anybody. But to have somebody go on to a live venue, Glastonbury, a music venue, which would have been watched by hundreds of thousands, if not millions, and to make that statement, I find that very hard to believe that wasn't some kind of orchestration there, some deliberate orchestration.
Yeah, interesting. We've got, let me just bring this comment up again. So you've got the Millennial Journal wanting to deflect, obviously wanting to hog some attention and deflect. Why are rabbis on record saying that Islam is the broom for Israel? Also, they're saying Islam's use is to remove Christianity from the West. I'm sure that's a baseless lie, because anyone can fabricate statements, or you can have people pretending to be rabbis. Muslims go around pretending to be Christians all the time, making comments and quotes on X and here on YouTube. I've come across them plenty of times. But that said, who's right between the claims that the Catholic Church started Islam, or the Jews started Islam, or maybe Arabs started Islam? So yeah, once you can tell me, if you can tell me which one, did the Jews start it or the Catholics start it? Once we define who started that correctly, then I'll have a little chat with you about that. But also, Islam is, as part of its doctrine, Muslims must murder every single Jew to bring the end times. So for these Jews, these would be very misinformed, very poorly educated Jews who don't understand what's going on with Islam, if there were Jews to begin with. And I've got to wonder how ignorant you are to not know this, that Muslims must conquer the entire world with violence or with deceit, by persuasion or by force, to enforce the Sharia across the entire world. Muslims are responsible for their own actions. Muslims must murder the Jews. This is a religious requirement. So yeah, any Jews who don't understand that and want to promote Islam would be very stupid. And I think this is one of those common lies that people tell about Jews simply because they are defenders of Islam. Are you a defender of Islam, Millennial Journal? Are you a pro-Islamic jihadi? Are you an anti-Semite? We have to wonder. So yeah, and if you have this record, then drop it so we can have a
Yeah.
look and I can investigate and we can see. Yeah, Thunders?
And I was just going to say, it seems kind of strange that people make comments like that and are unaware of Islamic eschatology with reference to Jews hiding behind a Gurkha tree, and there'll be rocks and other kinds of inanimate objects shouting out to Muslims, "There's a Jew hiding behind me, kill him." So I find it very strange that either the Jews would make comments when they. It's a bit like, your daddy's is, Turkey's voting for Christmas, that Jews would make any comments like this, or Muslims would decry it because they need Islam to move against the Jews because it's all a part of their Islamic eschatology, their last days prophecies. So Islam should be more motivated by what they see.
Sorry, Thunders, you're breaking up. You've gone quiet there. Just say that again, please. You said after eschatology.
No, I was just going to say, in Islamic eschatology, that there is an Islamic expectation that Islam is going to go after the Jewish nations wherever they are in the world, because in their eschatology, the Jew will be hiding behind the Gurkha tree, whereas other inanimate objects, trees and stones, will be shouting out to the Muslims, "There's a Jew hiding behind me, kill him." So the Muslims should be in expectation and to a heightened sense, because from their point of view, they should be looking at this as some kind of evidence to support Islam that the end times are here, and it's Islamic eschatology that's leading the pathway to the fulfillment of prophecy. So I find it very hard to believe that there is a reticence on some Muslims' part to challenge what the media is saying. And the other thing as well, there's no free will and everything is preordained. Then everything that is happening when they're using terminologies like there's a genocide taking place, where the genocide is only acting out what Allah's foreordained in the first place. So when they're using a vitriol against the genocide of what's taking place by the IDF on the Gazans, then are they not challenging Allah's decree?
Well, yeah, good. I mean, Islamic ideology doesn't make any sense anyway. Their theology doesn't make a lot of sense, except for, well, look, I mean, this whole claim, I'm going to be tolerant for a moment, but with the Millennial Journal, but honestly, I would think you'd be retarded to follow any kind of ideas like the ones you promoted there. And Islam may have been some heretical offshoot of Arianism, and it does say in the Sharia explicitly it is Gnostic. So that is not a notion, that is explicitly said by Muslim scholars in the Sharia. And of course, we've got historical backing that Islam, at least by one scholar, that Islam is based off an Arian heresy, but it aligns with Arian heresy. But that said, Muslims are also responsible for their own actions. Muslims also make up their own minds. They do their own things. They're not being manipulated by Jews. They're not being manipulated by the Vatican. Muslims have their own ideology that demands murder, death, slavery, and rape. And moving on. So let's not get distracted too much. Monologic says, no, the UK is not okay, hasn't been for a while, and the future looks like civil war. Yes, that is becoming a very common idea. And just, Shoshana, thank you very much. SOS from the UK, that's for £10. Thank you. The discussion around civil war is becoming very common, Thunderous. Or rather, it wouldn't be civil war, because that would be a war between, internal warfare between natives, whereas this would be an uprising between the natives and foreigners. One could say foreign invaders, but certainly imports who have taken over and become, shall we say, would consider parasites that are simply abusing the system, not adding to, but actually becoming a burden and also replacing the population.
You're saying abusing the system. I would argue against that. They're given the opportunities to exploit. They are given all the advantages that the indigenous are not being given. And this is what's causing the tension between the two camps. The ones that have not contributed, that are coming in, they're getting the hotels, they're getting the electric bikes, they're getting an opportunity to work, they're getting opportunities to go watch football teams, to learn how to DJ. I think in Scotland there were some comments about some immigrants are learning how to fly aeroplanes. I don't seem to... when you use the term civil war, I think there's a tension deliberately being manipulated, and the government, the powers that be, are facilitating that that tension to come up, because everything that is happening now, when you're going to go into stats later on, but the laws in this country are now not letting you challenge the narrative. So if you are going to use stats,
Thunderous, you're having audio dropouts.
that was deemed
Thunderous. Can you maybe? I wonder. Could you maybe? I don't know. Could you drop out or reboot your computer or something, because you're having connectivity issues and your audio is disappearing regularly.
Right. I'll log out and log back in again.
Okay, try that. Mike Samal says we Portuguese suffered a lot with the Portuguese Jews because they allied themselves with the Muslims to conquer the Iberian Peninsula. In the end, we ended up expelling them. Are you sure that's the entirety of the story? Because invariably, when I look at these stories, I find there's a lot more detail that wasn't always told. Because also there is the case that the Jews were also being abused by the Christians. The Jews were being abused by the church. And of course, the Muslims would simply come along and say, hey, we'll give you a better deal, which was also the case where they would simply lie to them to get them on side. And then, of course, they would abuse them later once they had whatever they want, whatever benefit they wanted. But also there is this fact that the church simply, not the church, but Christians, being often very poorly educated in history, also don't recognize the fact that Christians were guilty of murdering, killing, raping, robbing, etc., the Jews. So Christians also happen to have blood on their hands. And of course, if you're going to be abusing one group, don't be surprised when they reach out to another who's offering them an olive branch. So do understand there's going to be a lot more to this story than a simple black and white depiction, because that's very often the case. And so there's a lot more to the story. And of course, everyone forgets to mention the fact that there were also the crypto Muslims. I forget what the name is now, but of course there were these Muslims who pretended to be Christians who were literally cooperating. And we know this for a simple fact. We know this because of letters from the Ottoman Empire, that these people were literally cooperating with the Ottoman invasions of Europe. They were assisting, Protestants to also subvert, undermine, and basically militarily conquer the Catholics. So then you had Protestants literally collaborating with the Muslims, Protestants fighting with the Muslims, Protestants arming the Muslims, Protestants training the Muslims, Protestants harassing Christian armies. And ask yourself, where exactly were the Protestant armies during every major battle that saved Europe? Where were the Protestant armies? Where were the Protestant powers during every single battle that eventually stopped Islam from conquering Europe? Well, the Protestants were either at home because at that day they had to floss their cat, which was very important because their Muslim friends and allies were, going to defeat the Catholics, take over Europe, and then they were going to share in the spoils with their Muslim brothers. That was the whole plan. I've covered that in the past. And so they weren't there to support the Catholics because they wanted the Protestants, the reformers, they wanted the Muslims to win. They wanted the Muslims to conquer the Catholics. They collaborated with, they were traitors, they were working with the Muslims, aiding and abetting. So that is betrayal of Europe, and that's the Protestants. So let's not just paint a picture of the Jews worked with, because most often those are just blatant lies. But it is historically accurate that Protestants were working with the Muslims. Protestants were betraying Europe. Protestants did aid and abet the Muslims to conquer Europe. So where's the condemnation of the Protestants, of the reformers, for doing that? Where is that condemnation? Where were the Protestants for all those major battles? All of the major battles that saved Europe were Catholic battles, fought by Catholics. What were the Protestants doing? Betraying Europe. Very simple. Any comments you want to make on that? So, yeah. Let me see what is a comment. John Germain, the French and the Brits had not fought alongside the Ottomans in the Crimean War. The world did much. Okay. Yeah, well, French and Brits. The Brits were very much involved. The Dutch and the Brits were very much in bed with the Ottomans. Let me see. It boggles the mind how those in the West, after all this, still haven't woken up to that Islam is a cancer. All they have to do is look at history. Yes. Let me see if I've missed anything. Yes, whilst the government allows it, the people remain voiceless. Yeah, not war, civil unrest, like mob violence, religious strife. Yep, that's okay. Thunderous is restarting his laptop, so we'll give him a moment. Yes, Muhammad is an archetype, a warlord, and lie until they believe the lie. Yeah, that Hitler copied that as well, didn't he? The Nazi propaganda machine. Yeah, we forced the Jews to go to mass once. He read this version too. But of course, what was the name for these crypto Muslims that pretended to be Christians but were actually Muslims? They were also expelled, and they went and they acted as agents for the Ottomans. They actually would have been helping, because they did, according to letters from the Ottoman Empire, they were assisting Protestants with the invasion of Europe. So, yeah, Luther wanted the Ottomans to sack Rome. That is true. Hate is very powerful. I fully agree with you there. We are so bad and repress the Jews that we let them take everything they had. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but seriously, when are the Protestants going to apologize for the fact that they militarily collaborated, not just militarily, but that they collaborated with the Ottomans on the invasion of Europe, the Battle of Vienna? Who initiated that? The Muslims or the Protestants? The Protestants, of course. The Protestants went to the Muslims and said, hey, let's take Vienna and then we can share the spoils. We can divide Europe between us. That was a Protestant-inspired battle, right? And that wasn't blame all the Muslims. No, the Muslims went with it because it's a great idea for them, because they've been trying to take Europe unsuccessfully. And the Protestants said, yeah, let's do that. So the Protestants sold out. It was a military revolution. It was a theocratic military revolution. I'll talk more about John Calvin in the near future with his little Sharia state, Geneva. Yeah, laptop is being a bit slow. So yeah, let me see. Yeah, okay, well, let me share my screen and I'll dive into this. So I've got some numbers from a few different sources, and I'm going to show you this one source is bka.de. Let me just go to that website. This is from the Bundeskriminalamt. Right, this is the Bundeskriminalamt. That would be the German criminal bureau, and they publish a bunch of statistics. You can find it on this webpage, and then I found someone who's been processing this data to produce charts which show exactly what this data means. So you can go through this data. We can just translate this to English. So you can go through this. They've got data for the last decade or more, and German. So you can go through all of this. Criminal offenses and nationality of non-German suspects, and you can download XLS files. So they have a ton of data here. But this is the UK. Number of recorded rapes in England and Wales from 2002 to 2024. You can see here the numbers start rising sharply. That's around 2015. That's when mass migration started into Europe. So at that point, the rapes started. So this is, within the UK, you've had, in the last 10 years, a quadrupling of rapes, a quadrupling. This is not because white British men started raping 4 times more. It's because a minority of foreigners have started performing sexual violence on white girls, and of course non-Muslim women 4 times more. So this is quite a disturbing statistic. Yes, the Protestants did betray Europe. They 100%, 150% betrayed Europe. I've covered this extensively. I've covered this at length on the channel. The Protestants were working hand in hand. They were collaborating. They were betraying. They were undermining Europe. This was betrayal in the first degree by Protestants. Their hatred of Catholicism was such that they were siding with. You may not know the history, you may well be very ignorant of the history, but I would recommend that you don't make comments like this that are deeply ignorant or deeply false. So, and if you want to pretend that there's an equivalence, you would be wrong. Protestants were very much on side with the Ottomans. Protestants were very much in bed with the Ottomans. Protestants were collaborating. Just like you have the Vichy French who were hated for collaborating with the Nazis, Protestant history has hidden the fact that they were collaborating, just like the traitors that collaborated with the Nazis. The Protestants were just as guilty of that. And don't try to both sides this, because that would be false. That's a false story, not backed up by the history. So, yes. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, the curve is very sharp. I mean, that's a very explicit. So, careful with this chart, and simply sharing these kinds of charts can get you put in jail. Well, the Germans published this. Okay, just a couple of stats on this. So there's an X account called Mark Vanguard, and he has been working through these statistics, publishing charts on this. It says for the period 2016 to 2017, foreigners made up only 12% of the population, but they accounted for 67% of the suspects. So 12% of the population that are foreigners from Africa and European or Muslim countries are responsible for 67% of suspects in crimes, right? Then the overrepresentation of immigrants from Afghanistan and Africa is surreal. They make up barely 1% of the population, but are responsible for 34% of suspects in group rape offenses. I'd say that is pretty damning. Afghanistan and I think this is North Africa that he's generally referring to here. This is North African migrants like Sudan, Eritrea, places like that. That 1% of the population is responsible. These are blacks coming into Germany. The suspect rate for Afghans in group robberies is 10 times higher. 10 times higher than that of Germans. So Afghans in group robberies is 10 times higher than that of native Germans. African foreigners not lagging behind. Proportionally, they're involved in such offenses 40 times more often in violent crimes than Germans. So group robberies, right? Welcome back, Thunderous. You there?
Yeah, hi. Sorry about that. I've had to use a different device. Sorry, everybody, for the delay.
John, I don't have time to get into that. That's a completely different discussion right now, but I've done several shows over several hours on this topic in my past talks the last 2 months. So I've gone through that at length. So yeah, now's not the time, but yeah, I'm saying these things simply because I've been through the history. I've gone through it extensively, and I've shown that this is the case. And it's simply something that's generally lied about or not known, not discussed, but there was deep collaboration. And I'm not talking about casual. There was deep, extensive collaboration. It was nothing short of utterly treasonous. The Protestant Reformation was not just a theological change. No, it was military collaboration to destroy the current order, destroy the Catholics, and collaborate with those nice Muslims to help, So ask yourself, what is the root of some of the issues we face in Europe today? Yeah, Islam does hide behind being a religion, but yeah, it's not a religion. It's a military political system. It's a theocratic political system. Thunderous, welcome back. So you there?
Yes, I am.
Cool. Yeah, I was going through these figures here. I mean, this is disturbing reading here, and so African foreigners are involved in group robberies 40 times more than Germans, and Afghans 10 times higher rate than Germans. And then Afghans and Africans are 1% of the German population, but are responsible for 34% of group rapes. Interesting. And then the proportion of foreigners among suspects for group robberies rose abruptly during the immigration. Okay, from around 40% in 2015 to 70% in 2016. So that 2015 period onwards is when this immigration wave really went crazy. So here you've got a massive increase, nearly a doubling in 1 year. Any comments
Yeah, I think this is where the media and the powers that be will try and mislead the public by comparing immigrant crimes and the volume of crimes committed by immigrants with the volume of crimes committed by people of those particular countries. And obviously, because the people of those countries are in greater volume, greater number, you are going to have figures that probably represent crimes being committed by those people, which are may even outnumber the number of crimes being committed by immigrants, say sex or assault or violent burglaries and such. But what we're looking at here is a sharp increase and a correlation of immigrants going into certain countries and particular crimes being committed by those, which per capita are disproportionate when compared to people of said countries, Germany, Sweden, England, so on and so forth. And you can see one of the correlating factors in all of this is culture. If you have Polish moving to England or vice versa, or Europeans moving around Europe for temporary or permanent reasons, you may well see criminal activity by, say, a Polish person in Germany or a German in England and such. But culturally, their upbringing or their worldview will normally be the same. There is not much of a cultural difference between Europeans because Europe, for a greater or lesser extent, has been culturally influenced by the biblical narrative. But what you're seeing here with Africa and predominantly Muslim countries is a cultural difference in their worldview as to how they view certain things. So that's where the problem is. This is not a racist discussion. This is a cultural and ideological discussion, and we're seeing that represented in the sharp increase, which correlates with immigration coming into Europe, which is basically an alien culture or an alien ideology being reflected at the same time that immigration is taking place in Europe.
Right. Yeah. No, you're right. So this is immigration and crime, the immigration wave in Germany starting from 2015. You have a surge in the percentage of foreigners involved in gang sexual violence against women, right? So percentage of foreigners among suspects for gang rapes, Germany 2013 to 2017. 38% in 2013, rising to 46 in 2014, and then in 2016, 68%, and in 2017, 67%. This point here, 2015, is the mass arrival of immigrants. So that is interesting that you've got the majority of these rapes are caused by immigrants, not by the locals. Very interesting. And then percentage of foreigners among suspects for gang rapes. This also goes up here. You can see for foreign suspects. Now you've got a study on perpetrators of group sexual offenses in France reported that greater than 70% of individuals in the sample were of immigrant background, according to this statistic. So the origins of the perpetrators, you have here Sub-Saharan Africa, 20%, and Maghreb, 52%. So that's 72% of these suspects are from Africa. Very interesting. So yeah. Your thoughts on any thoughts on this, Thunderous?
Yeah, I think one has to bear in mind, culturally speaking, in certain countries, we're talking about things that are recorded in the way that they're being recorded. We don't know if there is a massaging or a manipulation of certain statistics by the criminal reporting method as to when they're reporting a crime. Are they being honest when a crime is being reported by the local legal authorities as to who is the perpetrator of the crime in order to deliberately massage the figures?
Yeah. I mean, look at the report that just came out in the UK. Who was it that just released this report now in the UK?
I forget who.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching her talk about some of that in the interviews and discussions, and she was saying that the police were deliberately removing the fact that Pakistanis from the reports. They literally were typexing out in one incident she mentioned, typexing out the fact that it's Pakistanis, and they weren't recording the nationality or the origin of the rapists simply because they could then claim, but we don't have the stats but they were deliberately not recording the stats simply to hide the fact that it's foreigners doing it.
I think that's one of the reasons why, because the statistics don't lie. Okay, they can be misrepresented. You can feed the narrative with statistics and massage it to suit your worldview, but the numbers are there. And I think this is just another method in order to, now that the information is getting out who are behind the crimes, maybe with the way that the crimes are being recorded may need to be looked at and refreshed, so as to not have a continuation or correlation of the crimes being committed and the people behind the crimes. I just want to add on something else as well. Before I got the job that I have now, working for a bank, I was actually a store manager for about 20 years, a buyer's manager, stores manager for a leading pre-owned company in this country. It didn't take long, I think I would probably say from about 2005 forward, where when crimes were being committed in store, we stopped recording them with the police because we felt that it was a pointless exercise having any crime recorded or registered with the police, because there was no investigation, nothing was coming off it. I think what I'm trying to say is, it wouldn't surprise me, but I dare say it's not. It's probably a very real reality that's recorded crimes. How much is going on that's not recorded? That's another concern as well. If this is the figures that we have officially, what are the actual figures that we don't have access to? Because people have looked at the situation and have thought, we're not going to get anywhere with this. They've seen what's happened with the sex grooming gangs. We've had about 10 years in this country of immigration and crimes not being reported. We've seen people doing shoplifting with immunity and impunity. We've seen people that are from another ideology or another culture being able to commit crimes with immunity and impunity. You could almost imagine that people in this country now are seeing it's a total waste of time to report the crime that's committed against them. So I would argue as well, that's the official figures. I wonder what the true crime statistics are of all crimes reported.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I think people are going to start pushing now for these stats. I mean, in the UK, Alex Phillips recently released a report and also a documentary, which I haven't seen, but she released one because they started to receive the stats that do exist, and the numbers are terrible. I mean, this one in Germany, Afghans and Pakistanis are proportionally 16 times more likely to be implicated in rapes than German citizens. So this is 2017 to 2021. People from the Maghreb, I guess that's North Africa, that's your Moroccans and so on. That's 11 times. Yeah, sorry, lots of echo and feedback there. Okay, so you have 11 times more likely, rest of Africa, 11 times more likely than Germans. Afghanistan and Pakistan are 16 times more likely to be involved in these kinds of crimes. Then Romania, Bulgaria, 3 times, Russia and Ukraine, the same as the local population, East Asia. I guess here they mean, like Indians or, I don't know, who knows. Thunderous just disappeared again. Thunderous, you back?
Am I back now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay. Yep. So then here again, crime rate amongst immigrants. Now, these are percentage of registered refugees. And then you look at the criminals, percentage of immigrant suspects. So roughly 50% of all the refugees from Syria and Iraq were involved in crimes. So within a year of coming into the country, about 50% of Syrians and Iraqis were involved in crime, right? This is from Malta. This is Maltese Migration Report 2017. Afghanistan, something like 60 to 70% of Afghanis who come into the country were guilty of a crime. Albania, Kosovo, of course, they already had. So then these are the percentage of registered refugees, but this is the percentage of immigrant suspects, right? So you look at, I mean, this is like enormous percentages. So you're looking at 60, I mean, almost 100% of these crimes are caused by foreigners. You have Algeria, Morocco, Tunis, Georgia, Bosnia, Eritrea, Somalia, Nigeria, Gambia, Albania, Kosovo. I mean, this is shocking. Sexual violence by suspect citizenship in Germany. So here you can have a look. You can see these numbers, the darker red. So the likelihood of someone being raped in Germany by people from these locations. So you can see here, you've got Iran. What's next to Iran? This is Afghanistan. That's Saudi. No, that's Saudi. This here is, that's Oman. What do we have here? Syria, sorry. And yeah, so you've got a lot of crimes by people from Africa and this part of Asia, far fewer here, right? Very few in the light blue. So you've also got some people from South America, little bits here, but basically almost zero from the rest of the world. And then, of course, sexual violence by these guys in Germany. That's 2014 to 2023. So these Africans and these people from Muslim majority countries are heavily responsible for this kind of rape in Germany. And this is not just restricted to Germany. Thunderous, can you mute your mic perhaps while I'm talking? Because there's feedback coming through. Yeah, theft and fraud by suspect citizenship in Germany. You can see here again, Africa, Middle Eastern countries, as well as Russia, heavily implicated. Okay, France too, sadly, but you've also got these countries here that are heavily implicated in crime in Germany. So this is theft and fraud. But then also you've got here from, I think, what's that, Malaysia, Indonesia. So Thunderous, any comments, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my first thought is that one has to look at the cultural and religious influences to the mindset of these people that are coming from these countries and coming into Europe. So there is already a pre-prejudice against women, okay? Hence why we see a particular type of crime committed by women. And I don't think European women, how can I put this? People coming from these countries tend to have the view, because of the teachers and maybe the influences of the media over in those countries, view Western European women as being very loose, very sex hungry, ripe for the taking, so to speak. And they've not been culturally sort of like inculcated in them that when you go to another country, that's just how they behave. Their worldview of women is totally different to the worldview that we have women in our own countries. So I think there's an influence there that has to be added to this. But also, they have come from countries, when you look at statistics of crimes, what's not being mentioned in there as well, and I think it's an important point, is the types of crimes that are being committed, in as much that the kind of brutality that they see in, say, the Middle East and Africa is a different type of brutality that we normally see in Europe. There was a moment in the 80s in England when there was a heavy influence of Jamaicans coming over to England that were nicknaming themselves the Yardies, as it were. But when they were committing crimes within their community and with others, it was with machetes. And that had never been seen before, where criminals were attacking criminals with machetes. When you're having an influence of, say, Africa and then the Middle East coming into, let's say, from Palestine and Syria, crimes over there where they'll get a machete and chop off your fingers or chop off your hands or gouge your eyes out. These types of violent actions are just everyday normal occurrence in those countries. Whereas over in Europe, they're very alien. I mean, normally if you have two men having a fight on the street, you know, it's between two men, it's a straightener, and it's, you know, two dogs, one bone. That's not kind of the mentality of people coming in from these countries. So not only are we seeing an escalation in crime, we're also seeing an escalation in the types of viciousness that's taking place with the crime. Because when you're looking at rapes that are being committed, it's not, I mean, rape is, I'm not trying to advocate rape, but the types of rape that Africans and people from the Middle East are committing, there's a certain amount of brutality that goes along with the rape as well. So it's not just the violent rape, there's the amount of violence that's inflicted on the woman as well.
Yeah, agreed. You know what, when I was growing up, and this is something that, there's actually a quote by a black American former politician, saying that when he's walking down the street, the dark street at night, and he hears footsteps behind him, and he looks over his shoulder, he's always relieved when he sees it's a white guy. And it's very simple. I've never been mugged by a white person. It's as simple as that. I've never been beaten by a white guy. It's really as simple as that. Interesting, David. James Flood says, notice the African Christian countries aren't in red, but the Islamic ones are. Yeah, there's a certain commonality there. There's definitely a certain commonality. So this data it spans 10 years, 21 million suspects, 1,000 types of offenses, and 190 citizenships. And these are the sources here, the Bundeskriminalamt for most of this data. That's the German Criminal Bureau, right? It's like their version of the FBI, I guess. And then also from the Statistisches Bundesamt. Okay, so this is the German statistical agency and the bureau. So yeah, this is where these stats come from. So these are legitimate sites, and someone has processed this. And 3/3. Okay, so this is physical and verbal violence. Where's that coming from? Look at Africa and Muslim countries. Sexual and sexist violence, Africa, Muslim countries. Theft and fraud, Africa, Muslim countries, plus Russia. Fascinating. Eastern Europe. Theft and fraud in Germany, foreigners significantly overrepresented amongst suspects. Okay, so foreigners are 13% of the population. Thefts without violence, nearly 40%. Robberies, 40%. Burglaries, 40%. Frauds, 33%. Now, last point I'll make on this topic, on this slide though, is that if you look at the UK, I think it was Bradford, Muslims are 4% of the local population. They were responsible for over 70% of the gang rapes that were occurring on the girls there. 4% of the population responsible for over 70% of the crimes. But if you take that 4%, that's all Muslims. If you look at adult males, ages say 18 to 25, 18 to 40, whatever, then you're going to look at half of that. So that's roughly 2%. So 2% are responsible for 70+% of the violent crimes. When they say 30% of blacks in the US are responsible for 65% of violent crimes, you need to understand that's 13% of all blacks in the US, right? But if you look at, it's only roughly 6% of those are males between 18 and 35 who are responsible for those crimes. So that means only 6% are responsible for 65% of the violent crime in the US. Those are very bad numbers. Thunderous, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think when you're referring to the 4% in Bradford, I think you can work the figures out in each city: Leicester, Luton, Manchester, so on and so forth. I think the problem is even bigger than that, because when a, say, white person commits a rape, it's normally it's not, how can I put this? The community know, in the Muslim community, what was going on. So it's not just the rapes that were taking place. It was the collusion of the community coming together in order to protect, and even in some cases facilitate, the perpetuation of the crime to continue going on. Mothers knew about it, sisters knew about it, brothers knew about it, the neighbors knew about it, local politicians knew about it, the police knew about it. So there was a certain amount of collusion within the community and in the power structure within those locations in order for the crime to take place. Whereas when you compare that with rapes, say, by white people on white women being concerned, normally there's no collusion within the family or the community to make sure that that person doesn't get arrested.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, it's like I remember always with the Bataclan massacre, when these guys were in Molenbeek, the entire neighborhood knew, but no one reported to the police. So you see that. Yeah, and then in Germany, the suspect rates for robberies among Maghreb nationals is 39 times higher than that of Germans. I mean, that is crazy. Africans, excluding Maghreb, 10 times higher than German population. So these people also, in the UK, for instance, every one of these people who's not, all these doctors, lawyers, and engineers that come across on small boats, right? Each of them costs the UK population during their lifetime £500,000. And the only people that actually add to the economy are those who come across who are already professional, already educated. So educated professionals add to the population. There's still a certain negative impact, obviously, that you're still replacing the white population. And of course, DEI hiring, of course, then disenfranchises the natives. But these immigrants coming in are not a benefit. I mean, the housing, just housing these immigrants that come into the UK costs something like £3,200 per minute in the UK, right? It costs £3,200 every 60 seconds to house these migrants. What? And these people do not add to the economy. They're a net drain on the economy. They're unemployed. They're on welfare. They take from the system. They overwhelm the system. They do not in any way add. Your thoughts, Thunderous?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's where you've mentioned statistics that are relative to the hotel costs at the moment. The government announced, I think we discussed this in the last show that was on, where the government have announced that private landlords are now being pursued by the government in order to house immigrants. And so that's going to create another ongoing problem, because if you're, say, and forgive me if I'm repeating myself from the last show, but if you're a landlord and you've got a sitting tenant in there that's maybe got, you've got maybe a yearly contract on, you're going to look to get yourself out of that yearly contract as soon as you can. Maybe even create a situation in order to get rid of your tenant, in order to put an immigrant in there, because you've got straight away a 5-year contract with the government. Now, the likelihood is that the housing build scheme in this country isn't going to be fast enough in order to accommodate what's already growing in our own country, never mind the immigration influx that are coming in from other lands. So the number of houses being built isn't going to match the number of requirements in order for the people to be housed. So I think that at the end of the 5 years, there's going to be another extension of possibly another 5 years for the landlord, for the immigrant that's going to be inside the house. Now, if there's another problem here as well, if you've got a tenant inside your house that's, say, the normal person that's been born in this country and has got a job down a warehouse, or he's a builder, or whatever his role may be, he's probably paying, as an example, let's just take a figure, £1,200 per month to live in that house, to rent that house. But if you're a landlord, you could probably charge the government £1,700. And the government will probably accept that £1,700 in order to put the immigrant in the house. Then the government have already assigned people to monitor the houses where the immigrants are staying, to make sure that all the bills are paid, to make sure that the property is kept to a certain order. So there's going to be a maintenance cost as well, but that's going to be free for the landlord. Then at the end of the 5 years, let's just pretend for a moment it's only going to be a 5-year contract, the government will then be refurbishing in the house to get it back to the standard that it was before the immigrant moved in. It's a win-win for the landlord. But if that's the case, there's a certain amount of logistics and things on the peripheral that's going to raise the cost of having immigrants in the country. Not only that, there's also dental care, there's eye care, there's the NHS care. Immigrants also have a VIP fast track when they go to the hospital for any care need that they have, which is I think it's a 15-minute wait for immigrants to be seen by the NHS. So there are a lot of other things happening on the peripheral to the advantage of an immigrant, as opposed to somebody that's been living in this country all their life.
Yeah. And then Shoshana says, what is non-violent about thefts? This is more gaslighting. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, you can feel violated if your things are stolen. Obviously, they're not. This might be breaking and entering, which then you might feel violated if that occurred. Someone smashed your car's windows or your house door, or, to break into your place. Yeah, they didn't hurt you in the process, but they certainly hurt you by leaving you with trauma and loss and stress. So yeah, there is that. In Germany, Afghans and Africans are proportionally 40 times and 70 times more likely to be involved in gang rapes than Germans. That's crazy stuff. What else? Let's see. Robberies in Germany, top 15 by citizenship, adjusted by suspect rate. Algeria, 35.7 times more likely than Germans to commit robbery. Georgia, 23, Libya, 17, Morocco, 14, Guinea-Bissau, 13. I mean, what the heck? How many people are there in Guinea-Bissau in Germany? I mean, it's a tiny little place, right? And they're responsible for such a massive majority of robberies in Germany. Congo, 10x, Liberia, 9x, Tunisia, 8x, Moldova, 7.5 times, Lebanon, 7 times, Jamaica, 6.8 times, Lithuania, 6, Niger, Mali, and Turkmenistan. Okay, fascinating. Sexual violence. This is from France. Outside the family context, number of suspects per 10,000 inhabitants, 4 French. And then within a marital context, 3 per 50,000. Then you look at foreigners outside the family context, 8 per 10,000 inhabitants. And within a marital context, 9 per 9 for the foreigners per 50,000 inhabitants. So you're looking at a 3 times more and a doubling here and a tripling here for foreigners for violence outside family and within the family context. That is crazy. So these people are 3 times more likely as foreigners to abuse the wife or the kids or both. Crazy stuff. So that's from 7 European countries. So this is not restricted purely to the UK. This is all across Europe. So yeah, that's crazy stuff. In France, the suspect rate for sexual violence among African foreigners is 2.5 times higher than the French. You're looking at here, they've got rape, domestic violence, sexual exhibitions, people, acting in a way that's, shall you say, inappropriate. The suspect rate for rapes among African foreigners is 8 times higher than that of Germans. Great. So African foreigners, 8 times higher than regular Germans. And of course, then you're looking at foreigners on the whole are 3 times higher. That's crazy stuff. Any thoughts, Thunderous, on some of these? I'll finish this and then we can go through 1 or 2 articles that you've mentioned.
I just want to add on this. When I commented a moment ago, it's the escalation of the type of crime that's being committed as well. I don't know if the audience are aware of this, but certain situations have taken place in hospital where women have been in comas, and the immigrant orderly that's working in the hospital or the care home, where the person is either severely disabled or is in a coma, and this can be looked at. I didn't realize we were going to go around this subject tonight, where they've actually been raped while they're in a vegetative state and have got pregnant.
No way. Good grief.
Yes. I have never heard of these crimes. As a 57-year-old man in this country, I had never heard of such things taking place. It had gone beyond the realms of, your dark imagination to ever conceive of an idea. But people can research this, or maybe I can get the evidence for the next time we're on the show of reference points where these types of crimes have been committed, where people in a vegetative state have been raped. And the hospital thought, in some instances, that the person in the coma was having a cyst grown in their stomach. They thought it was a cyst. They didn't realize it was a pregnancy until it had become too obvious.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Now we have Denmark. Conviction rate among residents of African origins 10 times higher than that of the natives. 2022, 1,800 declared victims. So Danes, natives 1.5, that's the baseline. Immigrant origin is 5, which is 3 times more, more than 3 times, and of which African foreigners, that's crazy. It's more than 10 times more. So this is what's happening in Denmark. Villena says if white women valued motherhood, you wouldn't need the migrants. And who's telling the native population that motherhood is disgusting? True. Feminism and other issues that have, and then everyone's claiming, oh my God, we're not having kids. You're below the replacement rate. And then, it doesn't make sense. And why do you want to bring this in? Where can I check these statistics? I showed bka.de, and there were 2. There was the Bundeskriminalamt and the status. These stats I got, so the source of the stats are the status, that's the Statistisches Bundesamt. I'm going to drop this in the chat now, and also bka.de, Bundeskriminalamt. I'll drop this in the chat as well. But these stats I got from an X account. So I got these from an X account, and I'll drop that in the link. I'll show it later. But I got this from an X account where this guy's been working these statistics to show what these numbers look like. These are for lots of European countries, focusing on Germany, but lots of European countries. Shoshana says all these Islamic cultures are permitted and encouraged to assault women. They have no boundaries, and no one in the West is stopping them. Yeah, although I think you'd seeing it in Ballymena in Ireland, people are starting to push back. They're getting a little tired. And I think the lesson we're learning is that violence does work. If dialogue, the law, discussing with politicians, voting fails to work, people are realizing, the only option you have left are the non-peaceful ones, which is unfortunate. But this seems to be where these things are going.
Can I just add on the Irish thing? In my estimation, with Ireland, what's happened there is the reason why they're able to push back is because they've got you're within a generation of people that have lived through a very difficult time between the wars of the Catholics and the Protestants. So there is a sense of community spirit that still prevails in Ireland, and a strong community hub that probably still prevails, where there's people are still able to come together as a community and respond, which I don't think is something that is happening in England anymore because of how fragmented and dissected and splintered the country has become within my own generation.
Yeah, although, you know what, the world might be pulled together. I'm going to also drop in, I mean, I just think that at some point people might rally together when it's us versus them, right? So this is an account, Mark Vanguard, or just look up this name, Mark Vanguard. Just look up that name as you see, Mark Vanguard. Look this up on X. You should be able to find, this guy's compiled all of these statistics. So you can use that on x.com, Mark_Vanguard there. He should be able to, it's in the chat, use that. He goes through the stats. Germany, foreigners accounting for 67% of those implicated in gang rapes versus 12% of the local population. So yeah, 67% here. So foreigners, right, are 12% of Germany, but they're responsible for 67% of these gang rapes. Again, I think the stats are very clear. In Germany, Afghans and Africans make up 34% of those implicated in gang rapes. That's this section here, right, compared to 1% of the population. Yeah, so I mean, other foreigners and then Germans. So yeah, you're looking at, it's clearly out of control. The suspect rate for fraud among Maghreb nationals is 14 times higher than that of Germans. I mean, why are you importing this into Europe? Why are you bringing these people in? What benefit does this add? I mean, really, it's like next thing they'll be importing Hamas, you know? Yeah, so those are my stats. Thunderous, did you want to go through some of those articles that we looked at?
Yeah, we could do. I just wanted to comment on what Shoshana has commented about that. What's happening in Ireland has brought Protestants and Catholics together. Yeah, it has. But the thing is, what I was trying to say was that the Protestants and the Catholics in their own sort of communities hadn't become splintered or divided. They were still Catholic and Protestant communities that still had a sense of culture between them and camaraderie and togetherness and bonding that hadn't been splintered as it is in this country, in the United Kingdom. So the influx of immigrants there, if anything, has actually strengthened the bonds of the Catholics and the Protestants to come together as one, facing what they consider is an invasion, and not just an invasion of foreign people, but it's almost like a cultural takeover with the types of crimes that are being committed over there that we are seeing reflected in our own country.
Yeah, hold on. I actually just realized I saw this on GB News. They published this. Let me just bring this up here. Foreign national share of convictions 2024. So foreigners commit 25% of sex crimes. Foreigners are what in total of the UK population? 7%. Something a foreign population is 10.9%, but they are responsible for 25% of all sexual crimes in the UK. So that was an interesting stat as well. And when you look at Rotherham, 1 in 73 people in Rotherham is responsible for, I think, sexual violence, and these are Muslims. So 1 in 73 Muslims is responsible, I think, for sexual crimes, which is I didn't record the context, but it's a really high number of people when you think about it. More than 1 in 100 people is a sexual predator in Rotherham, and these are almost all Pakistani Muslims.
I think as well, this goes back to something that you and I have discussed many a time with reference to these kind of crimes, that if these figures are there, they've not been put together by an organization for public consumption. They're there as statistics as far as criminal activities taking place. They've broken down the percentages as to who's committed the crimes. So you can be sure that the government have access to these figures too. So they know what is going on, and it's not unique to one country. This is a problem throughout Europe taking place. So so when the question is asked, do the politicians know what they're doing, and all these things that are happening are just sort of like a byproducts of stupid errors and mistakes and ill judgment? I counter that by saying no, absolutely not. This is all by design. This is all very deliberate. There is no way on earth that you could have maybe 15 or 20 years as a slow incremental increase of immigration is taking place within Europe, that you have correlated figures of criminal activity from the very people that are coming in from that demographic, committing the crimes that are taking place in Europe, and an escalation of those crimes, rape, violence, fraud, as you've mentioned as well. There's a correlation there. They know that correlation, and it's interesting that when these when people who are brave enough or informed enough to mention these figures in the media, the GB News or say the BBC ITV or whatever is played in Germany, Poland, and whatever, they'll normally get shouted down by a leftist representative saying, well, white people rape too. And in fact, when you look at the figures, white people rape more than, say, immigrants do. That may be true because the percent, we have to look at the percent. We're talking about figures that are per capita. You may have a country of, say, 100 million people with 10,000 rapes taking place, and say 7,000 of them are committed by white people, but the other 3,000 is just, and that's, you know, you've got to marry that with the number of representation of that 7,000 in that country. When you're looking at the 3,000 that are remaining, may have only come out of only about 10,000 people that are representative of those immigrant people from another country anyway. So per capita, the figures are disproportionate to the crime being committed in the country. So, you know, this is all good work that you brought out here, Lloyd. This is the sort of stuff that should go into the public arena, into the media, but you'll be shouted down as a racist. Or,
yeah, but remember with the new rape gang inquiry in the UK, remember just recently Starmer was saying that people are lying, people are making up racist, false claims against immigrants, and they are, you know, it's a dog whistle to the far right. And then he suddenly calls for an inquiry. And also this paper that came out says that no, these are Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. So he's gone from, in just a couple of weeks, from saying this is all lies and this is all, you know, far right, false far right claims to yes, there is a problem with Pakistani Muslims, you know, going across Britain. And these are networks. These are not isolated incidents. These are networks. These girls were trafficked across the country. They were being moved from town to town, and the law enforcement was involved. Law enforcement was informing these people of investigations, warning them of issues. And of course, they would say that you've got victims that are making complaints, making reports. And of course, victims are saying they would then get texts while they're sitting in the office making the report, you know, giving testimony. They'd get messages from these Muslims saying, we have your brother or your sister here. We're going to hurt them if you don't leave the police station right now and drop your report, which means there was complicit criminality by the police, aiding and abetting these criminals. Who's been charged? Nobody. Who's been jailed? Nobody. What investigations have there been? Well, very little. People have had maybe a strongly worded letter, you know, but nobody has been charged for this.
But Lloyd, you have to bear in mind that the police also sort of like refer to some of these girls at the age of 14 as being prostitutes. Yes. 14-year-old girls by the legal system being referred to as prostitutes. We've had one or two fathers standing outside houses wanting their daughter back while the daughter was actually being raped inside the house, and the police arrested the father for harassment. You know, the responses that we've heard come out, we this is just the surface. We really do not know what the local governments and the police force have been hiding in all of this. And if you recall, I sent you a list of, say, was it 52 MPs, Labour MPs or political MPs that have been arrested for child pornography crimes in this country. There is a clear problem with child sex crimes, not just locally, but nationally and by extent internationally as well.
Yeah. And of course, you have more attacks on Britain, on white culture. I mean, this is just, once you dehumanize, once you demonize the culture, just as people one of the issues I have with people that constantly dehumanize Jews and demonize Jews is that once you've demonized and dehumanized the group, you then legitimize violence against them because you've othered them to the point that it's okay to visit violence upon them. And this is happening in South Africa to the Afrikaners. I've seen this. This is happening right now. And this is happening to white people across Europe. They're being denied their history. So, for instance, you sent me that Stonehenge was built by Black Britons, right? And we've got this here, for instance. Let me just drag this over. British school children are being taught that Vikings were not exclusively white, but a diverse group that included Muslims, according to a guide provided to schools by the Brilliant Club. So Muslims built Britain. Muslims built the wheel. Muslims invented fire. Muslims invented the Tesla auto driving system. Muslims created, oh God, it doesn't stop, does it?
That goes on. There was was it in Rochdale or Manchester? There was a guy that's standing for being a member of Parliament over in Manchester, where he made a comment. It's the same guy where he was recently in the news saying that we anybody who offends the prophet, there's going to be repercussions. So it was it's sort of like a sincere hidden threat in his tone that if you say anything about Islam, about the prophet, we're prepared to die. Meaning, if you say anything about the prophet, we're going to kill you. That's in effect what he was trying to say. But in the later on release of an interview that he was having, he was going on about like how after World War II, England had been rebuilt by Muslim Pakistanis coming over and building the factories, working in the factories and such, and then made the comment, we're not here to take part, we're here to take over. So you're right, history is actually being reinvented in order to fit a certain narrative, and the narrative is to go against the indigenous.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question one has to wonder. Emmanuel Goldstein's from Germany. Should we invite him on for a few minutes? Emmanuel, would you like to come on for a couple of minutes? I will drop the link in the chat. And if you'd like to come on for a few minutes and tell us some of your thoughts, since I believe you're in Germany, right? There's the link. It's now in the chat. So, yeah, if you have a moment, come on and join us. I think the fact that they're now rewriting history like this is very disturbing. Thunderous, do you want to go on to some of those articles that you sent me? Do you want to chat about some of those things? I mean, also, the UK now has this law that allows abortion up until birth.
Yeah, there's two things that came out in England in the past couple of weeks, and one of them is now that it's been it's no longer a criminal act to abort a child after 24 weeks, which in effect is basically you can now have in this country a full-term abortion. This in itself raises a severe moral dilemma. Abortion anyway is a problem, but to now say, well, we're not going to restrict at what point an abortion can take place, just further sort of like promotes the depravity or the mindset of people that are willing to abort a child up until the point of birth of the child. Then later on that same week came out that the assisted suicide or assisted dying bill is now going to go to the House of Lords, which means if it's going to go to the House of Lords, it's likely to get passed. Now, the problem with the assisted dying, which is interesting because they want you dead before you're born and they want you dead before you're supposed to die. The assisted suicide is a concern because, as people may well be aware, in Canada, you can have assisted suicide for homelessness, you can have assisted suicide for depression or PTSD. So if that then is going to get allowed, if that's now legalized in Canada, in Belgium, I sent you the link to the girl that was 24 years old after witnessing a terrorist attack in the Belgium airport. She saw her friend get killed by terrorists. She opted for PTSD. The state allowed the 24-year-old child to die by supplying her the poison in order to have the suicide. But the terrorists are still serving life in prison. Where does this now go to as far as assisted suicide is going to go? Because once you've allowed it, the line will become more and more blurred or redrawn.
But notice how this always seems to affect white women having babies. They're not telling other cultures to do it.
No, but what they are saying is that we won't tell other cultures what the sex of the child is, which is interesting in itself. Because if they're going to not say what the sex of the child is, but we're going to abort it anyway, what they're basically saying is that the sex of the child is more important than the abortion of the child. Surely.
Okay, yeah. And Emmanuel has just joined us. Emmanuel, welcome.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great, good. Well, there's actually a lot of things I can talk about. Yeah, yes. Firstly, of course, I'm in Germany. As I already also said in another chat, I grew up in a Gnostic occult commune, Christian Gnosticism, which is about as Christian as Satanism. So yeah, there's a lot I could talk about, I guess.
Yeah, but in terms of this topic, I mean, you're saying that these Afghanis control the prostitution.
About that, one aspect was actually that my mother tried to raise me as a girl. That was one of her little experiments she did with me, also within that cult. I mean, group. Which didn't really work because I vigorously refused, but it was pretty bad because she tried to do that like until I was like 7, and she thought that gender identity is purely a social construct. So she thought that.
Look, interesting topic, but not really related to what we're discussing right now. And we can certainly discuss that again. But I mean, you were saying that German brothels are run by Afghani pimps. And of course, they have the German biker gangs that provide protection, but you have the Afghanis running the brothels.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about some of that and the crime?
Yeah. We got to talk about all this stuff someday because there's a lot of stuff I could get into. Anyway, because of my difficult childhood, I ran away when I was 15. I was living alone ever since then. And the rent was cheapest at the red light district. So, I was actually, when I was 15, I was living in the red light district alone, all by myself, because the rent was cheap. And I learned very fast that not to look into the eyes of the pimps. Because that would get you into trouble. That would even get me into trouble, even though I wasn't involved in that. But I was vulnerable, so I learned that very quickly. And they were all Afghanis, or pretty much all of them. And it was their mafia that was running it. Yes, and the girls were all pretty much at least at that time, they were pretty much all from Russia. And they were running this kind of human trafficking thing, right? Where they would be like, oh, pay us this, and like 80,000 euros or whatever amount of money, and we'll make sure you can go to Germany. We'll arrange everything for you, all the papers and everything, and and then they'd be like, well, but I don't have 80,000 euros. And then they'd be like, well, no problem. Germany is like a wonderland. It's, it's the land where milk and honey flows. So it will be very easy for you to work in Germany. And then you can just pay us back with the work you're doing in Germany. Which, of course, at that time, they don't know it yet. But, of course, the work they're going to do is prostitution. And that's how they're going to pay them back, and that's how they turned into basically human slaves.
Wow, that's disturbing. And so you've got this happening in Germany, then is it happening in France? Very likely. Is it happening
the thing with Germany is that prostitution is legal, which I'm not against. How shall I? It's a bit difficult. I'm a very maybe classical liberal guy, right? So I'm not I'm not in favor of the state intervening too much in people's lives, but in that case, it actually makes sense to make prostitution illegal, because that allows the police to step in cases like that. Because if prostitution, and that's why this is so widespread in Germany, because prostitution is legal. So the police, of course, the police always check the women, and and they ask them, "Are you doing this voluntarily?" And of course, they say yes, because if they say no, their family, back in their country of origin, will get into very big trouble, and the police cannot protect them there. So in that case, prostitution being illegal kind of makes sense, not to make prostitution illegal, but to protect women like that, because then the police can take them away, not so as to arrest them and punish them, but so as to protect them.
Wow, and that makes me wonder. I mean, this is not something that is well known. That you think Germans would be running crime in Germany, but now you're saying you're looking at a foreign group with a very minor representation in terms of population numbers, but they are doing something significant, obviously, which brings in a lot of money. And I mean, when it comes to prostitution, you're also looking at drugs, and there's probably extortion, there's probably bribery, there's probably blackmail involved as well. Makes you wonder, what about other countries? Do you see the same thing? Are we not looking at the same problem in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Belgium, and pick the countries, Denmark, other countries? I mean, that is disturbing to know. I was not aware of that.
Can I just ask a question on that? Is it these minorities controlling the crime is because the manner of violence that they're prepared to go to or use is disproportionate as to what the normal German criminal or the normal English criminal or the normal Polish criminal would have used? Because when it's gang on gang violence within a certain country, there are unwritten rules, as it were. There's a code of conduct or a code of practice that you don't go beyond. Whereas when you're importing crimes from Albania, Pakistan, and Africa, there are no rules. They're prepared to use a violence that in this country, certainly in England, we're not prepared to go to. We're not prepared to go to that length in criminal activity with that kind of brutality. That's not to suggest that that's not to suggest that they're not capable of it, but they've not had it inculcated from birth. Because from birth in these countries, that's all you grow up seeing. Yeah. You grow up seeing people macheting people. It's not uncommon to see dead human beings lying on the ground with body parts missing. I've seen body parts missing in Pakistan when I've been there. I know what these countries are capable of. I'm not prepared to go to that level of depravity in a criminal act. But I'm pretty sure that people that I've grown up with are not prepared to use that kind of violence. So I'm just wondering, is it the depth of violence that's creating the power to be disproportionate with gangs that from other minorities?
You're asking me?
I'm asking both of you guys.
What are your thoughts? Sorry. Well, look, let me add something to this.
I'm very hesitant to generalize things, but I can talk a little bit more about the dynamics that I'm aware of. So it's not like it's only people from Afghanistan that are doing that, but the area that I'm aware of was controlled by them. So it's the mafia, and you have different mafia groups from different countries controlling different regions, right? So the region I was in was, that was indeed controlled by their mafia, but other regions in Germany are controlled by mafia organizations from other countries, right? And all of them also have connections to German organized crime as well. They're kind of working hand in hand, and different people have different roles, and they're all very much capable of violence. It's not like violence is only a trait of the power. These
granted, but if you look at the likelihood,
they're all very much capable of violence.
Well, look, they're all capable of violence, certainly. But if you look at on a cultural basis, if you look at the likelihood of violent crime in Germany by Germans versus Africa by Africans, you're going to find a lot higher likelihood of violence and violent offenses by Africans. You look at the UK, Africans are far more heavily represented in violent crimes versus the white population because the cultures lend themselves towards violence for multiple reasons. I mean, you've got lots of reasons why, but certain cultures are more likely to be more violent, which is also why the cultures are less successful, because their cultures, instead of solving problems rationally, they tend to use violence. So they're less likely to develop scientifically, they're less likely to develop socially, because they've got these cultural prejudices, they've got these cultural norms that are not. Europe has advanced because it has set certain limits and certain caps on these behaviors. They're not acceptable, right? Obviously, a criminal underworld will break the rules, but you've got certain caps that have been set by the law, by culture, by education, and so on. Those do not exist in those cultures. One example I was reading today, I was looking into some of these things. There are loads of reports by American servicemen who worked in Afghanistan who talk about the sexual molestation of young boys. And they will speak of also how these criminals operate, and very often to hide the crime. For instance, like the stories that I was reading today. And these are stories, and American servicemen have been prosecuted for acting on this. For instance, okay, so you have the army, you have the police captain, right? The police captain kidnaps a young boy. Now, the family, when you ask an Afghan, they'll say, if you ask an Afghan how many children you have, he'll say, I have 3 boys. He could have 10 kids. He's got 7 girls and 3 boys. He doesn't care about the girls at all. You say, I've got 3 boys. If a boy disappears, they are very concerned. They'll go to the police. Now, the police captain is the guy that kidnapped the kid, and they've got him stuck in a room somewhere, and they're busy using him for fun, because they have the saying, boys are for fun, women are for babies, but boys are for fun, right? And what happens is the police will say, look, I'll tell you what, I will look for your child, but you'll extort money from them with some bribes to help him, because if you guys pay me, I'll make sure that I can grease the wheels and make sure we find your child. Meanwhile, he will abuse that kid for some time. Then when he's done with him, he'll pass him on to his colleagues. And then when they're done with him, they will kill the child. They will leave him on the side of the road, or as the servicemen are reporting, they will chop him up into little pieces, into tiny pieces, stuff him in a sewer. The American servicemen will find these people, and they said they were fishing them out of holes and drains and things with coat hangers in small pieces. And they said it's horrific, and then the situation just repeats. And they would hear in the camps, they would hear from various places these kids being tortured by groups of men, and they're not allowed because this was normal. They had to allow it because it's part of their culture. I mean, this is utterly abnormal in Western culture to behave this way. So this is part and parcel of that kind of culture, which is it is satanic. I mean, it's barbaric. So you're looking at differences in culture.
Yeah, I think what I was trying to say was that you made the comparison with the mafia. I think the mafia will come around and break your legs, whereas people from these countries will come around and remove your legs. So that's what I'm talking about, a disproportionate sense of violence. Yeah. Also, I think in this country, just to go back, I think it was about 20 years now, we had a famous incident in this country called the Torso in the Thames, where because of the influx of immigration from Africa, the police have had to set up their own body of looking at child sacrifices taking place in the United Kingdom because they found the headless body of a child in the River Thames. It was called the Torso in the Thames case. As a result of that, they've had to set up their own independent body to look into the influence of child sacrifice to take place in England. If it is not going on, why the heck set up a body or an investigation unit to investigate these crimes? So it's not, you can say that violence can be inflicted on, say, white parents can inflict violence on, say their own children, and in some instances the violence inflicted from, say, a white person onto their white child could result in death and has done on occasion. But it's disproportionate in the type when you're removing the head and sacrificing it to an ideology. So it's a different type of crime. It's still both of them are brutal crimes, but one of them has a type of violence that is not seen in this country. And just go back to my analogy, the mafia will come around and break your legs. These people will come around and remove them. That's the difference. And I think that is the fear factor that gives these type of criminals the power, because the indigenous crime mafias, as it were, or crime organizations, criminal organizations, are not prepared to go to that level of violence.
I kind of disagree. Like, my experience is that they're all willing to go to to resort to extreme violence. They have their
Well, they're psychopaths.
morals,
They will,
and
but
they
as a
run it as
norm,
a business. And if you don't play along, if you try to get out, or God forbid, if you rat on them, they're all very much capable of extreme violence, and they see it. They don't see it as immoral; they see it as moral. They have
these are psychopaths, and of
morality.
course, I mean, these are psychopaths. So of course, they're going to behave in this way, but this is an abnormal atrocity in Western culture, whereas it's pretty common in those cultures. So this is an extreme in this culture, but in African culture, for instance, something like that might be common on a Tuesday. You know, it's as common as having Tuesdays. It's normal. Like, you might think that. I mean, you look at a certain culture where, look at the, shall we say, unemployed behaviors you find on TikTok of these blacks in Japan or in Asia. They go to Korea and places. That's not normal for whites to do. That's normal for blacks to do, because behavior of that type. Look at the rioting in Paris. That's not Jews running amok. Those are black people running wild. So this is not common for normal, shall we say, native Parisians to be doing, but it's for black immigrants and black foreigners to be doing. So it's not exactly the same. Certainly, psychopaths are going to act violently. That's to be expected.
Just to answer a question in the comments, Mona Logic asks, are albino body parts still demand in Africa? Now, I remember about 10 years ago, I think it was Russia Today did a documentary on that. I think the problem was in Zambia or Zanzibar, somewhere in the north of Africa, where albino children were sort of disregarded from their family and taken into a special home, and actually there were instances where they had body parts removed from them. I remember it. I think every time I try and upload it, YouTube removed the documentary, because I've actually got it on my hard drive. So I may have to go onto another media to upload it. But from what I know, I've not found any documentary to suggest that that's not still ongoing.
Emmanuel, back to you.
Yeah. So I feel there's two aspects here. One is the criminal aspect, and they're all connected. These criminal organizations, they work together, you know, including the German gangs, and including the Russian mafia as well. They're all connected, and they're all working together. And that's why these mafia organizations can reach the families of the girl in the country of origin, whereas the police in Germany cannot, so the police cannot protect them. That's a big problem. The other aspect we've been kind of getting into is like this occult aspect, and I know a little bit about that as well. I mean, not that extreme, but when I grew up in that occult Gnostic cult, they also had rituals, and they had rituals involving sacrifice. Not anything, that extreme, but it was already going in that direction. So I know, and I've seen myself, such ritual sacrifices. Not with humans or anything like that, but I've seen myself these kinds of rituals that require the sacrifice of something that's alive. In my case, that was mostly animals or even just plants and stuff like that. But it's already going in that direction.
That is disturbing. I mean, it's really not a difference in kind, but only in degree. Because if you just go a little further down that road, you end up with humans on the table.
Exactly. Because I was never involved in any kind of high level stuff, right? So it was just the small stuff. So with the small stuff, it's enough to have like small sacrifices. And then, of course, if you want to accomplish big stuff, the sacrifices get bigger.
That is disturbing. That is really disturbing to know. But you're right. You raised some very interesting points that there's collaboration between these groups. Which means there's a network. They work together because someone's got to arrange logistics. Someone has to find these girls. Someone has to transport these girls. Someone has to market the stories. Someone has to accommodate them. It's a very organized, obviously, type of crime then. And these groups are all profiting.
It is very organized, yes. And, just like in a company, different people are involved with different aspects, and it's run like a company, like a business.
What do you think would happen if Germany had to crack down on these foreigners, take these criminals and throw them out, get rid of them? Wouldn't things then be better? Wouldn't Germany have less crime because there's less foreign criminals?
I think the solution would actually be to make prostitution illegal. Of course, that's never going to happen in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
But because people don't understand it. People think, they want to prevent people from voluntarily engaging in that kind of thing. But that's really not what it is about. In most countries where prostitution is illegal, the point is really not to crack down on people who are doing this voluntarily, but to crack down on people, on girls who are being forced to do this not voluntarily, and to protect the girls. But a lot of people don't understand that.
No, Faye, you raised some very interesting points. I mean, this is wow. I mean, this is gonna, these people obviously play with the law, and sometimes the law seems to favor the criminal. It's like the politicians were helping out with some of these, the way the law was drafted. So one has to wonder.
Yeah, I think if we remember, just talking about collusion between criminal activity and, say, child rape as an example, I don't think you're going to go much further back to the Joe Rogan interview with Donald Trump, where Donald Trump made a comment that something like 350,000 children had gone missing over the Mexican border in 4 years under Biden. Joe Rogan didn't challenge that figure, and I think in the discussion that you and I had, we'd brought up a point where it was actually 329,000 that actually gone missing.
And where are those kids? Yeah.
But there has to be a collusion for that. You can't, there is no way on earth 330,000 children can go missing and there not be collusion with authorities allowing that to happen.
Do you guys remember there was this a movie that came out recently, about a year ago, on child abduction, and they spoke about this agent who set up an organization, and he went after this little girl that was taken to this young girl that was abducted.
Yeah.
And the backlash against the movie for exposing these gangs was crazy. It's like a crime is being exposed, and the left was going wild trying to shut it down, which means that obviously then you're looking at an industry that benefits from this and doesn't want it exposed.
I think certain people from a certain demographic were actually incensed because their names came up in as being facilitators in that, and I think it's an interesting point that sometime after that movie, I think we probably talked about 3 years ago when it was actually released, you've had people like Sean Diddy getting arrested, and one of the crimes he's being convicted of is grooming children and trafficking them. I also just want to go to Shoshana. Shoshana asks a question: what is full-term abortion but human sacrifice? Even in Holland, I read they're offering children who are depressed to commit suicide. Can I just say to Shoshana, I'm actually going to email this document to Lloyd sometime in the week. It was addressed to the Center of Bioethics, Cedarville University. It was written in 2004, and it's with reference to child sacrifice in the Western world. And I'm sure Lloyd will put this upon the channel. It makes a rational comparison between child sacrifices of the times of the Baals and abortion today, and it's a fascinating read. So I'll send this to Lloyd, and maybe we can discuss it next time we're on the show.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Man, that's Emmanuel. You seem to have some very interesting knowledge of. Well, and obviously life experience as well. I mean, that is really something that we can definitely talk about. Are you available this week? Because I have to probably do it this week, because the next 2 weeks I may not be available to stream. Next week, the week after, certainly I will not be available. So if you're free this week, I would suggest Wednesday or Thursday.
I've sent you an email. Have you seen it?
So I did read it. Sorry,
you just reply to the email, and I'll make whatever time you want possible. There's a lot of stuff we can talk about, but one more thing, since we've gotten this far, and since we've talked about criminal organizations and structures, again, there is a relationship between what we just talked about, what you guys just talked about with, with the topic that this movie Sound of Freedom revolves around. There is also a relation to these. This topic. I don't want to name it because YouTube doesn't like horrible words like that.
I know.
Related to trafficking and stuff like that. There is a relation to that and organized crime as well, and there's a certain mechanism. Why are these organized crime organizations able to keep people in line, keep people corrupt, keep politicians looking the other way, keep the police looking the other way? Why do they have so much influence? Why do the people who should put an end to this, why do they keep silent about it? The reason for that is very simple, and it's it's related to that kind of trafficking as well. If you're involved with these kinds of criminal organizations, at a certain point, and that goes for the occult organizations as well, both in the criminal underworld and in occult organizations as well. Once you reach the very top, or if you want to reach the very top, you have to do something that is compromising, right?
Uh-huh.
So they can use that against you if you should ever step out of line.
Yes, I've actually I've heard of that myself. That's part of some also gang initiation rituals. You commit a murder that is recorded and witnessed, so they use that against you or something like that. They can use it against you if you step out of line, and then that will bring you down as well. Yeah, no, that is interesting, and I'm sure there's a cult connection. I'm sure there's something there because I'm looking into Crowley right now, and it's disturbing. But the links from Crowley, it's like once you start tracing things backwards, you start to find all the wrong people are connected in all the wrong ways, and that's very disturbing, Emmanuel. That's
the group I was I don't even want to say involved with, because I was never given a choice to join them. I was simply born into it, and it was a local Gnostic group. I'm sure it's not the kind of groups you're usually thinking of, right? But it's similar in the sense that it was a Gnostic group, and they were not so much based on Crowley. They were more based on Madame Blavatsky, very much based.
Oh no, the two are connected. I'm working on that right now. You can draw a straight line from her to him.
It's all, if you really get into it, it all gets pretty bad.
Yeah. No, that was one of in fact, my slides on Crowley open up with basically Blavatsky and draws a line to Crowley. So these things are, man, you're raising a lot of things that, some of these things come across like a movie plot. So it seems like fiction or it seems exaggerated. But as you look through the history, you start to realize that these things are true. This is not fiction. This is reality. And when you look at serial killers and stuff, you start to connect to occult and satanic dots very quickly.
Yeah.
It's not like these happen necessarily in isolation, like it's some guy with a psychosis. Sometimes there are links to the saints of the satanic, the occult, and it's disturbing. Many people think the Gnostics are just, these innocent, carefree, free thinkers. And you're like, no, Gnosticism is satanic.
That is their facade, and the group I grew up in, they also had that kind of facade. Their facade was like, Christians, but they weren't Christians. They were Christian Gnostics, but they passed themselves off as Christians, and they passed themselves off as these kind of, hippies, New Age stuff, love stuff. But that was all just a facade, and under all that, they also, because they have two layers, they have like an outer layer, and then they have like the inner teachings, and the inner teachings always go back to people like, like either like Crowley or Madame Blavatsky, and people like that who taught some pretty bad stuff. Again, if you read their books, I mean, even if you just read the normal books they published, it's already pretty bad. But the more you go into it, the more you realize there's some really dark stuff there, and they kind of cover it up with a very shallow facade. Yeah.
Disturbing. Look, it's beyond the scope of our discussion, and I wasn't quite expecting to go down this road really, but here we are. But then you have to wonder how much of this is also related to occult practice. All of these, what's happening in the UK, how many of these people are actually in some way, these acts are not just crimes, but they are worship of Satan, or they are some kind of sacrifice to, or some kind of ritual to further this whole satanic influence. It may well be the case. I mean, there seems to be enough hints that look at Epstein and others, you will have to wonder.
If you're going to look at things from the biblical narrative and use Satan as the one that they're going to be sacrificing to, one has to bear in mind that there is a rich history that is provided in the Bible of surrounding nations to the nation of Israel doing that very thing, even to the point even kings from the nation of Israel succumbed to child sacrifice. Most notably would be Manasseh, who sacrificed his own children to Molech. So I think the problem people have is that they when they start hearing about child sacrifices, even people who accept the biblical narrative, it's almost like their buttocks start to clench. It's like, oh, we're going into territory that's really embarrassing or awkward. When in the reality is, what makes people think that if it was going on then, and Satan was endorsing it and encouraging and promoting the practice of child sacrifice, what makes people think it's not going on now? In my estimation, all it has been done is been dressed up and given a different type of veneer. They're no longer sacrificing to Molech and throwing their baby into like a giant burning urn where the fire will consume the child. That's obviously not taking place anymore. There's still a child sacrifice, but it's just done in a different way now. Yeah. We're seeing a different form of child sacrifice. It's just done it in a different manner. So it's the same thing to the same God, but practiced in a different way.
Fair point. Yeah, we should wind down. So Emmanuel, I'll leave a last word to you and to Thunderous, and we can call it an evening. But this has been really fascinating. Did not expect to end up here, but here we are.
Yeah, it sounds horrible, and a lot of people can't believe it, and to a lot of people it even sounds ridiculous, and that's by design. I really liked some of these conspiracy theorists and the truthers and so on, but then they gotten extreme and they gotten Gnostic as well, and and they gotten just completely crazy. But I feel that's by design. You have they assuming that there are people involved in these horrible things. Of course, it's in their interest that people do not take this seriously. And the best way to do that is get people like these conspiracy theorists and like these truthers, get them to act extreme so that they're not taken serious.
Fair point taken. Before I forget, we started off the show, there was my discussion where I spoke about the Protestant allies of the Ottoman Empire. This is a very lengthy, very detailed document that discusses exactly that problem. This one is called Christian Allies of the Ottoman Empire by Emrah Safa Gurkan, right? Original in English here, published in 2010. And this is a very lengthy document. You can see up here, this is a very long document, lots of historical references. And he tells you the Christians, and he means here the Protestants, were instrumental in the early successes of the Ottoman Empire, right? And it says here that the Ottomans did not hesitate to rely on the expertise of and offer contracts to foreign Christians when it suited their interests, that a number of Christian allies at the state level, they did not necessarily fight with their Christian neighbors all the time. They had a strategic, logistical, and pragmatic calculations which would override the religious convictions. That would come later. Once they had their goal, they would then turn on their allies. But this enabled them to contract alliances and marriages and make treaties with Christian polities. And that's very nice, except when you read through the rest of the document, you'll see it wasn't the Catholics. This is 99%. This is Protestants who were part of the army, who were training, assisting, you name it. So for the person that mentioned that no, it did not happen, yes, it did. I've covered this at length. And there was extensive Protestant collaboration with the Ottomans to help them invade Europe. This was not an accident. This was well orchestrated, very well organized. And you'd have the Protestants harassing the Catholics, trying to mess with their supply lines. And then you'd have Protestants attack Catholics, then the Ottomans invade, right? And then just this whole leapfrog thing. The Ottomans would then do something, and then the Catholics are busy here, and then the Protestants do something. And they would just keep dividing and conquering. And every major battle, ask yourself, where were the Protestants? Where were the Protestants? All of them were at home flossing their cat. I can tell you that now. If you want to ask who saved Europe from Muslim invasion, Catholics. What were the Protestants doing? Working with the enemy, fighting with the enemy, assisting the enemy, attacking the other Christians with the enemy. That simple. So, okay, so guys, yeah, that's it from me on this. Thunderous, last word from you.
Yeah, I'll concur with yourself, Lloyd. The conversations from start to finish went into directions I didn't think they were going to go in, but it's been a very interesting discussion to have. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Nice to meet you, Emmanuel, for the first time. Hopefully you and I will have a discussion with joining Lloyd together again sometime in the future. And I want to say thank you to the panel for listening this evening, and some of the very good questions that have been asked. That's given me an opportunity to maybe go away and do a little bit more research that I haven't got up to date on.
Yeah, we can do this in a month again. So maybe sort of like the 27th of next month. We'd be happy. We'll do this again. Thunderous and I will be back. Emmanuel, so you and I will talk. We'll meet up this week. So I'll respond to your email. I read your email. I've just been busy. Life. I don't run a channel full time. I wish I did, but I don't. So yeah. So everyone, thank you. Emmanuel, any final word? Otherwise, we'll call it a night. Okay, so Thunderous, thank you. And to the audience, thank you very much for your participation. Thanks all for being here, for the questions, the comments. Emmanuel, thank you for that. That was, yes, definitely food for thought. And unfortunately, it is part of the world. I mean, this is the world that we live in. And yeah, we have to look at these things as uncomfortable as they are. So guys, I'll be back tomorrow night. I will see you guys then. And then I'll be back on Tuesday with Usama, and Emmanuel and I will talk about the rest of the week. So take care, everyone. Good night. God bless.